Hello and welcome to the second episode of HeartTalk. This is Wajiha and my co-host Shahzeb. And this particular series of episodes is focused on the folk tales of our region. And today's episode is on a very specific folk tale pertaining to our land of Sindh.
So yeah, we did Heer Ranja previous week. Today we are talking about the legend of Marvi from the desert region of Thar. So it's a story of a village girl from a shepherd community of nomads. She's abducted, she's trapped in a fortress far away by a king. And the story is really about how she deals with it. It's a story of patriotism. It's about her integrity, steadfastness, how she spends that time when she's imprisoned. It's also about resistance. So there's a lot of political element to it, and we will talk about it.
So coming to Umer Marvi, the story, it's set in Malir, like you have said, in Thar. Marvi is born to these a small village family, parents, and she's born as a really beautiful girl. And Marvi means moon face, and Mar Ruhi, Ma is means the moon, and she's extremely beautiful. And there is this boy in the village called Phog, who is in love with her. But Marvi is actually said to be married off to her cousin or her relative called Khet, right? And when Phog hears about this, about Marvi actually getting married off to someone else, he's very angry and upset, and he goes and complains to the ruler of that time, who is again, like you mentioned, Umer Soomro. And Umer Soomro is a Rajput king. And Phog goes to him and says, Marvi is really beautiful, and he doesn't want this eventual marriage to take place between Khet and
He's a spoiler.
He's a spoiler, and he's jealous, and he wants Marvi for himself. But Umer Soomro is very intrigued. Who is this beautiful woman that he actually is intrigued by, and he wants to see and wants to know how beautiful is she. So Umer Soomro decides to visit the village and to see who Marvi really is. So he comes across her. She is filling some water from a well. And she offers him some water. Umer Soomro is really amazed by her beauty, and he falls in love with her, and he decides to kidnap her. And he says, she will be mine. And he takes her to Umerkot, which, like you mentioned, is actually originally was called Amarkot, but the name was changed to Umerkot. He keeps Marvi trapped in a fortress in Umerkot. And he says, "Ke main tumhe jo tum kahogi, you have to be mine, just marry me. He showers her with riches and with jewels, and he's also married. He already has a lot of queens that he's married to. He's like, they will be your slaves. I will be your ghulam, just accept me and marry me." But Marvi, because she loves her people, she loves Khet, she loves her land, she loves her family, she loves where she comes from. She is steadfast, and she says, I will not give in to this. Umer Soomro is, of course, very angry by this. How dare Marvi deny me this? And she says, he decides to put her in prison. That's where Marvi is just completely entrapped in prison. And the way she gets by through different seasons is just remembering her people. And she also tells him that if I die, even if I die here, I'm willing to sacrifice my life, but please bury me where my land is, because that's where I'm going to eventually return. There's a sudden twist, and this is one different version, where of the story, and I don't know, there are multiple versions of the story, where there is, Umer Soomro comes across this nurse, या जिसे हम दाई कहेंगे, right? A wet nurse. who actually tells Umer Soomro, this is the kahani mein twist, कि actually, you know, you and Marvi are moog bole behen bhai because you've had milk from the same mother, and that obviously makes you siblings. So that really creeps him out, and he's, you know, kind of very ashamed, and he decides to return Marvi back to Malir. She goes back to her land, back to her people, back to Khet, but they're a little suspicious of her, you know. She's been away for all this while with Umer Soomro, maybe married him, and actually secretly is with him. So they want her to prove her chastity and prove her loyalty. And so Marvi then decides to walk on this coal of fire to actually prove her chastity and to prove her loyalty to her people. And so she walks over it and she comes out completely unscathed. And that, you know, makes her people believe that waqai mein she was actually always true to us, and so they accept her. And that's where the story ends. Of course, this is one version.
So she's vindicated.
So she's vindicated, but, you know, she continues to live in people's imaginations, in the history of Sindh. तो आपको क्या लगता है शाहज़ेब कि what are the overt themes that, you know, come out of this story, and how do you relate to this story?
So as you said, the theme of patriotism really stands out. I mean, we've looked at some of these other folk tales which are often about love between a man and a woman, but in this one it's about her sense of belonging to the land and people. So she's not really yearning for a lover, she's yearning for her land and her people. And I think in that respect, this is a slightly unique story. The idea of patriotism is also very interesting because we hear a lot about it these days in Pakistan. The concept has been, in my view, has been hijacked by some powerful people who like to award degrees of patriotism to certain people and deny it to others who are critical. But in Marvi's sense, she feels that if she gives in to the temptations being offered by the king, she will be betraying her people. And it is that battle that she wins because she refuses to give in. And throughout Shah Latif's poetry in Sur Marvi, you know, she's remembering her people, the lifestyle. Umer Soomro is showering her with, you know, nice clothes, silk clothes,
Prada bags, Gucci shoes.
And she's unimpressed.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't want anything to do with this. I long for the woolen shawl that my people
The simplicity.
wear, the simplicity of lifestyle. And in that way, the fortress becomes a metaphor for soul trapped in a body, also fighting temptation. So, you know, for me, this is about how when you are in prison, for example, and how you put up that fight. A lot of people over the years in Pakistan have been put in jail, confined, like Marvi, or they've been sent into exile. My father was in jail for about 5 years during Zia's martial law, and I've often asked him, how did you pass time, you know, when you were in prison? And there is something about being in confinement against your will, but having that hope and remembering the world outside, remembering your loved ones, that keeps you going, he used to tell me. The same analogy for Benazir Bhutto, when she was in exile in the 80s, and again, I met her the second time she was in exile. She was like fish out of water. I mean, people could say to her, you've got money, you've got a place, you have freedom. Why do you want to go back to a place like Pakistan and risk your life? And it was that sense of belonging to people and the land that comes through in Marvi. And I remember when she came back the first time after her exile, the slogan we heard on the streets of Karachi was Marvi, Malir ji, Benazir, Benazir. So our people saw in Benazir what Marvi went through.
So she was this symbol of resistance, of revolution in some sense. और अभी तक उसको इसी तरह मारवी को evoke किया जाता है. You know, it's pretty amazing to see that, you know, this woman, this really powerful woman, is the symbol of resistance in Sindhi folk poetry and literature. For me, what I think is of course something that I struggle with is that this aspect of chastity and honor specifically being associated with women. And we see this in many other folk tales, and of course in this one as well. And I know you have a different perspective on this.
I agree that it is a patriarchal concept. For example, you would never hear in these stories that a man has to prove his chastity, right? It's always a woman who has to prove. So I take your point about that. And I was looking at this wonderful book by Shabnam Virmani and Vipul Rikhi. It's called I Saw Myself, Journeys with Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai. And there's a chapter on Umer Marvi, and she brings out a really interesting point. And she says, well, don't take chastity, the concept as we take it, but it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor that you can stay true to yourself. You can keep your purity. You can resist the temptations and the indulgences of the material world. So according to her, this is chastity in that sense, not in terms of like losing your virginity or having premarital sex or whatever. Those are, that is kind of at a very different level. I know in society, these, especially in our culture and religion, it's like the, you know, the defining thing about honor. This book, the reason I like it, it's accessible. The way the authors explain the surahs and relate to it to modern day world and spirituality, it's amazing. So if there's one book you need to read, it's this book. Yeah. The only problem is it's not available in Pakistan.
Of course, because of the glorious relations between the two countries.
So it was available a couple of years ago when it came out. It was available at Liberty Books. But after this whole Abhinandan episode, Pakistan said we're not going to have any books from India, so they banned it. And so last year, when I was in Karachi, I wanted to get my hands on it. I met this really good friend of ours, you know, he's a former culture secretary, Hamid Akhun, and I went to him and I said, how can I find this book? And he said, wait, I have extra copies, but I'm not going to give it to you. You can go photocopy it. So that's how I have it. But if you are out of Pakistan, you can order it online. Right. It is available.
So thanks for letting us know, and thanks for introducing me to it. I think I like it because it goes into the spiritual meaning, and every folk tale that we will be even talking about, even Heer Ranjha that we discussed previously, there is a worldly meaning to it, but then there is a deeper allegorical, spiritual meaning that's attached to it. And I'm interested to explore that spiritual meaning. Okay, what does that mean when Marvi is trapped in a fort? Yeah. You know, and that, what we learned, or what we read, or what we see is that's actually Marvi's soul that's trapped in her body. It's her mind being trapped, her thoughts being trapped. But she herself is something that's beyond her body. So that's like the spiritual significance that is, you know, found in a lot of our traditions, in a lot of our Sufi traditions as well, that there is a different meaning to it rather than just a worldly.
Is that the meaning you got out of it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, you know, I connected with it because, you know, in today's world, how I connected is that, you know, there's this whole revival of taking care of your mind, taking care of yourself, you know. Mental health is a big thing. And mindfulness teaches one about this, you know, that you are not your thoughts, and that you yourself as a person are much more than what you think all the time. And in some ways, this is the lesson that I personally get from the story of Umer Marvi.
So let me play devil's advocate. Okay. Because a lot of people would say, oh, bahut acha hai, zabardast, quite deep, but it's really good only in books. Doesn't really apply in the real world.
What doesn't apply?
This whole idea of, for example, detachment. I mean, over here, for example, like you said, it's about it's also about freeing your soul, which is trapped in your body. What does that mean? I mean, are we asking people to go commit suicide and be free? No, we're not saying that, right? I mean, I understand the point about resisting temptation. But again, in the real world, you're taught, go after for what you want, whether it's career, whether it's ambition, whether it's goals, whether it is material things, which you need. You need a house, you need a car, you need a decent balance in your bank. But when you look at all this, I mean, I understand, but I'm struggling. How does it relate to my everyday life, you know, or anybody's everyday life? Because जब आप सब कुछ छोड़ देते हैं और आप कहते हैं कि ये सब एक तमाशा है, दुनिया तमाशा है, you know, this is all these people, you know, victims of greed and selfishness. So what I mean, I don't think they're saying ये जितने भी हम कलाम पढ़ रहे हैं या जो folklore है कि जी आप सब कुछ छोड़ छाड़ के आप desert में चले जाएं, be a wanderer like Shah Latif, and wisdom will dawn on you.
Actually, so this is interesting because, yeah, in some ways, you know, kahin pe I was also wondering ke, you know, Marvi just accepts, you know, and she just says, ठीक है, मैं इधर imprisoned हूँ, तो मैं पूरी ज़िंदगी, you know, I'm just going to accept it and I'll. But sometimes does acceptance mean that you don't stand up for yourself and you just accept whatever is going wrong in your society also, and you just detach yourself and don't really make an effort to change things, right? So that's also, some people could be misled into thinking that. Ke aap detach kar le, that means you shouldn't bother about anything. But actually, I don't think that's the meaning. For me, I think what that means is that you learn to accept circumstances, whatever they might be, and you are able to deal with them. But also realize that every circumstance is temporary.
It depends where you are in life and which situation you are in. I mean, I do see that you can draw lessons from it. You know, when you are, for example, completely helpless, how do you cope with it? And I've read some stuff, you know, जब Nazi Germany में जब gas chambers में थे बहुत सारे लोग, they had no control over their lives. And yet there were many of them who managed to survive by reframing their mind, right? Gaining control of their own mind and body. I understand all that. I was just wondering, इस पूरे इसमें जैसे मारवी को she's in a big palace, वो उससे वादा कर रहा है कि you'll be the chief queen, all these luxuries. What if she accepted? I mean, if she had I don't know, somebody to give her advice, and they'll be like, you know, go for it. You know, you will not be betraying your people. You know, maybe you can.
Maybe she made a political alliance and, like, you know, brought bridges and more infrastructure development to. That would be a completely different story.
It would be a different story. But I think we get why this story is has stayed through the centuries. It is still part and parcel of Thar's life, their thought process. For me, I think, as I was saying earlier, the idea of resistance. She goes on hunger strike, by the way. When he's bringing her all this great food, this is a ultimate form of resistance.
Beauty is almost destroyed, right, in the process.
She doesn't take care of herself. Yeah, she's not taking shower.
And she says, मैं उस beauty को बिल्कुल इतना ruin कर दूँगी कि
you don't even want me anymore. So these are forms of resistance, and I think in this day and age, Pakistan में दूसरे मुल्कों में जहाँ पे people are oppressed, there's a lot of inspiration in here. You don't have to go on a destructive, violent path, but you can resist in your own way. So I think there's a lot in there, and I would just urge our viewers, listeners, if you're not familiar with this, do explore, and who knows what you might come across. So Wajiha, we've talked about the story. We've talked about what you got out of it, what I got out of it. We are coming to the end of our episode, but before we let you go, how about you sing us something about Umer Marvi?
Okay, let's do that. And so I've learned a few of the lines, just say bet kenge from Sur Marvi. We don't know if it's actually from Sur Marvi, but many singers have sung this, and I'm singing a version by the great Abda Parveen. And I think this relates to the time when Marvi's trapped in the prison, and she's remembering her people. So these are just a few lines. I'm not a native Sindhi speaker.
Go for it. You'll be great.
Umeraun vindaro pucha koe Allah jithe munjha maru. Umeraun vindaro pucha koe Allah jithe munjha maru. Jithe munjha maru ada jithe munjha sangi ada jithe munjha maru. Umeraun vindaro pucha koe Allah jithe munjha maru. Jithe munjha maru ada jithe munjha sangi ada jithe munjha maru. Jithe munjha maru.
Wow, wow, wow. Zabardast. I don't know how you do it. It's not your language, but you pull it off. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the honor.
So with that, we end today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with another folk tale, Wajiha and I. But for now, thank you.